welcome to QIMA's Supply Chain Soundbites. If you are, a supply chain manager, Q1 probably threw you a pretty massive curveball.
Yeah, without a doubt.
You probably thought your biggest Q2 threat was cargo ships getting stuck or just rerouted around the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, the shipping delays.
Exactly. But the real disaster isn't shipping delays at all. It's actually a hidden energy crunch that is quietly shutting down the factories you rely on.
And we are pulling this insight directly from the latest QIMA quarterly Barometer report, which is, well, it analyzes data from tens of thousands of QIMA inspections and audits.
Yeah, it's amazing for tracking global quality, compliance, and trade trends.
Definitely. And the data shows that global inspection and audit demand actually fell 1% year over year in March, which was right after the Hormuz closure.
Right, so the immediate reaction was obviously to focus on the freight routes.
Yeah, everyone panicked about the ships. But focusing just on the ships is kind of like, it's like triaging a patient for a broken leg while totally ignoring internal bleeding.
Oh, wow, that's an intense analogy.
Well, it fits, The ships rerouted, sure, but the crude oil didn't.
Right.
And the factories powering these supply chains are essentially being starved of the fuel they need to actually run their machines.
So it's kind of like a massive traffic jam. The initial panic is the delay itself, but the real disaster is like all the cars idling on the highway and just running out of gas.
That is a perfect way to put it. You've got these huge manufacturing hubs across South and Southeast Asia, and they depend heavily on Middle Eastern fuel imports to operate.
Okay, so what happens when that fuel doesn't arrive?
We are already seeing massive textile and apparel suppliers in places like Bangladesh and India forced to operate well under capacity.
Because they literally don't have the power to keep the lights on.
Exactly.
Wow,
Right.
which creates an immediate bottleneck, right? If factory capacity is shrinking because of an energy shortage, it suddenly becomes a seller's market.
Yep. The factory owners get to pick and choose whose orders they actually fill.
And this is happening right as U.S. buyers are pouring into these exact regions. QIMA's data shows U.S. demand in South and Southeast Asia jumped 21% year over year.
It's a huge jump. They are aggressively pushing into those markets to diversify away from China.
Right, especially since actual reshoring back to the U.S. is still hovering at a tiny 1 to 3%.
Exactly. But here is a major complication. At the exact same time, Washington just launched new Section 301 trade probes into several of these Asian markets.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it signals a potential new wave of tariffs targeting unfair trade practices.
Oh, wait, that makes no strategic sense. U.S. buyers are spending millions to transition their supply chains away from China and to Southeast Asia, and Washington is rewarding them with new tariff threats.
It is definitely contradictory.
Aren't they totally undermining their own diversification strategy?
Well, we aren't here to take a political stance on the policies themselves, right? But strictly from a data perspective, it absolutely complicates things for U.S. buyers. It fundamentally changes supplier leverage. Well, think about it. If you are a factory owner in Vietnam or Bangladesh, and you have limited energy to run your machines.
Oh, I see. You're going to prioritize the most stable, predictable clients.
Precisely. And unpredictable U.S. trade policies make American buyers a massive risk right now.
So if Southeast Asian suppliers are filtering out U.S. buyers, who are they actually filling their limited capacity with?
They're filling it with emerging markets. Latin American demand in Southeast Asia just surged 53%.
Wow, 53%.
Yeah. And the irony of this whole U.S. diversification push is that it is driving emerging markets straight into the arms of China.
Because China isn't retreating from the global stage at all.
No, they're just restructuring their global anchor. South and Latin American buyers now account for 32% of QIMA inspections in China.
Which officially overtakes the EU.
Exactly.
So what happens to European buyers in this reshuffle? It sounds like they're just getting squeezed out of both Southeast Asia and China.
Not quite. They are actually adapting through a really distinct China plus strategy.
Oh, right. Yeah, instead of abandoning China, European companies are expanding nearshoring in the Mediterranean places like Turkey or North Africa, just to shorten critical supply lines.
But they are keeping China as their core offshore base for the heavy volume.
Yes, the anchor is still China, but the counterweight keeping that anchor heavy is increasingly coming from the global south.
So the map is being entirely redrawn by fuel shortages and trade policy.
It really is.
So if you are navigating this landscape in Q2, the data points to 3 practical steps you need to take right now. First, map your South and Southeast Asian suppliers' direct exposure to regional energy shortages.
Right. You need to know whose factory floor is at risk of going dark.
Exactly. Second, you have to develop backup capacity plans immediately in response to those emerging U.S. trade probes.
Because you really cannot afford to be caught without a scalable alternative if new tariffs hit your primary diversification market.
Yeah. And third, strengthen your key supplier relationships. In a tight market restricted by limited energy, you have to ensure you remain a prioritized buyer, especially when factories start cutting allocations, which, leaves a major lingering question.
Yeah. If Asian suppliers do continue prioritizing non-U.S. buyers because of tariff unpredictability, will American brands eventually be forced to quietly shift their orders back to China just to keep product on the shelves?
It is definitely something to seriously consider as you plan for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining QIMA Supply Chain Soundbites.